Imagine a world where books disappear overnight, where literature that shaped minds for generations is suddenly removed from shelves, where powerful stories of identity, history, and human experience become forbidden knowledge. This isn't fiction. This happened. Welcome to Story-Driven English, where we explore the English language through compelling real-world narratives that will captivate your mind while expanding your vocabulary. Today's story takes us inside the prestigious United States Naval Academy, where one morning, a dedicated librarian named Eleanor Reed received an unexpected order: remove 381 books from the shelves immediately. Among them, Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give, and numerous works about American history, civil rights, and diverse experiences. What happens when knowledge becomes restricted? How do students and educators respond when access to ideas is suddenly limited? And what does this reveal about the enduring power of books to shape our understanding of the world? Join us as we dive into The Silent Shelves, a Naval Academy story, a tale of courage, compromise, and the quiet resistance of those who believe in the freedom to read and think. Before we begin, if you're new to Story-Driven English, this channel is dedicated to helping you master English through immersive storytelling. Our carefully crafted narratives feature natural vocabulary repetition, contextual learning, and real-world scenarios that will transform how you absorb and retain the English language. Hit the subscribe button and notification bell now to join thousands of learners who are revolutionizing their English skills through the power of story. Your journey to English fluency has never been more engaging or effective. Now, let's turn the page to our story. The Silent Shelves, a Naval Academy story. In the crisp early hours of an April morning, librarian Eleanor Reed arrived at the Nimitz Library on the grounds of the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, Maryland. The historic brick building stood proudly against the backdrop of Chesapeake Bay, its windows reflecting the first light of dawn. For 25 years, Eleanor had walked through these doors, believing in the power of knowledge and the freedom found within books. Today, however, something felt different. A heaviness hung in the air. Eleanor noticed a group of Academy officials gathered near the entrance. Among them was Commander James Wallace, the Academy's executive officer, whose face bore an unusual grimness. "Good morning, Commander," Eleanor said, her voice carrying a hint of concern. "Morning, Eleanor," he replied, his tone measured. "We need to talk in your office before the library opens." Inside her modest office with walls lined with photographs of naval history and literature awards, Commander Wallace handed her a document bearing the Department of Defense seal. "This comes directly from the Secretary of Defense's office. We've been ordered to remove specific books from our collection, effective immediately." Eleanor's hand trembled slightly as she received the papers. "On what grounds?" "Executive orders regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion content," Commander Wallace replied. "The list identifies 381 titles. We need to begin removal today." Eleanor stared at the list, recognizing many titles instantly. Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Stacey Abrams' Our Time Is Now, and Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give were among the first she noticed. Works about the Holocaust, African Americans in World War II, civil rights history, and gender studies filled the pages. These are important works," Commander. Award-winning books, historical analyses, Eleanor said, her voice strained. Some are fundamental texts in understanding American history. I understand your concerns, Commander Wallace said, his voice softening slightly. But these orders come from the highest levels. The Secretary will be visiting tomorrow, and we need to complete this today. As Commander Wallace left, Eleanor sank into her chair. Through the window, she could see midshipmen crossing the yard, backpacks slung over their uniformed shoulders, heading to morning classes. These young men and women were being trained to defend American values, including, ironically, the freedom of expression that seemed under threat within these very walls. Eleanor thought of her father, a retired Navy captain who had instilled in her a deep respect for both naval tradition and intellectual freedom. The mind is like a parachute, he used to say. It works best when it's open. With a deep breath, Eleanor called her staff together to explain the situation. We have been instructed to remove certain books from our collection, she began, watching their expressions shift from curiosity to concern. I'm going to need everyone's help. Among her staff was Marcus Chen, a young assistant librarian who had joined the team just last year after completing his master's in library science. His eyes widened as Eleanor handed out copies of the list. But Ms. Reed, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, some of these books help me understand my own identity, my place in American history. Eleanor nodded, understanding all too well. I know, Marcus. I know. The library staff dispersed throughout the vast collection, their faces solemn as they began the task of identifying and removing the listed books. Word spread quickly around campus, and by mid-morning, several midshipmen and faculty members had approached Eleanor with questions and concerns. Professor Daniel Blackwell from the History Department arrived just before lunch, his bow tie slightly askew as if he had hurried across campus. Eleanor, is it true? Are they really removing Half American from the shelves? He asked, referring to Matthew Delmont's acclaimed book about African Americans who fought in World War II. I'm afraid so, Daniel, Eleanor replied, along with nearly 400 others. Professor Blackwell shook his head in disbelief. I assigned that book in my military history course. It provides critical context about who fought for this country and why. These midshipmen need to understand the full spectrum of naval and military history. Throughout the day, Eleanor and her staff continued their task, each book they removed feeling heavier than its physical weight would suggest. By mid-afternoon, carts filled with the collected volumes lined her office wall, waiting to be processed and stored away. As the sun began to set over the academy grounds, casting long shadows across the historic buildings, Eleanor found herself alone in the stacks. She ran her fingers along the spines of books still on the shelves, noticing the gaps where titles had been removed, gaps that represented more than just physical space but holes in the collective knowledge available to these future naval officers. Her contemplation was interrupted by a knock on the nearby shelf. Looking up, she saw Midshipman Sophia Martinez, a senior known for her academic excellence and leadership potential. Ms. Reed? I heard about what's happening, Sophia said softly. My English professor was upset when she found out I know why the caged bird sings was being removed. Eleanor nodded, unsure what to say to this young woman about to graduate and take a commission in the Navy. That book changed how I see the world, Sophia continued. I read it my plebe year when I was struggling to fit in here. Angelou's Resilience. It gave me strength. It's a powerful book, Eleanor agreed, feeling a lump in her throat. Will the books come back someday? Sophia asked. Eleanor paused, choosing her words carefully. Books have a way of surviving, Midshipman Martinez. Ideas never truly disappear, even when attempts are made to silence them. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. My grandfather was a naval officer too. He used to tell me that part of what he fought for was the freedom to read, to think, to question. Your grandfather was a wise man, Eleanor said with a small smile. As Sophia left, Eleanor returned to her office where Marcus was organizing the final cart of books. His face showed the strain of the day, but there was something else there too, resolve. What happens to them now? He asked, gesturing to the carts. For now, they'll be catalogued and stored in the restricted archives, Eleanor explained. Not accessible to general circulation, but at least preserved. That evening, after most of the staff had gone home, Eleanor sat at her desk writing a detailed report of the day's activities. As required, she listed each title removed, its author, and its previous location in the library's catalog system. This documentation felt important somehow, a record of what had been lost. The next morning dawned bright and clear. Flags snapped in the breeze along the Academy's parade ground as preparations were made for the Secretary of Defense's visit. Eleanor arrived early, finding Commander Wallace waiting in the library's main reading room. "Is it done?" he asked simply. "Yes, Commander," Eleanor replied. "All 381 titles have been removed as instructed." He nodded, relief visible on his face. "The Secretary will tour the facility at 1100 hours. He'll likely want to speak with you briefly." "I'll be ready," Eleanor assured him, though she wasn't entirely sure what that meant. At precisely 11 a.m., the library doors opened, and Secretary Pete Hegseth entered, flanked by military aides and Academy leadership. Eleanor straightened her jacket and stepped forward to meet him. "Secretary Hegseth, welcome to Nimitz Library," she said professionally. "I'm Eleanor Reed, head librarian." The secretary shook her hand firmly. "Thank you, Ms. Reed. I understand you've completed the collection review we requested." "Yes, sir. All titles identified in the directive have been removed from general circulation." Secretary Hegseth nodded approvingly. "Good. The President's executive order is clear. We're restoring focus to our military's primary mission. These social experiments and divisive materials have no place in training our future naval officers." Eleanor maintained her composure despite her internal disagreement. "Would you like a tour of our facilities, Mr. Secretary?" As they walked through the library, Secretary Hegseth commented on various historical naval displays while pointedly not mentioning the recent removals. When they reached the American history section, he paused, seemingly satisfied by the absence of certain titles. "You know," he said, gesturing broadly, "when I was growing up, we learned about American heroes, about exceptionalism and patriotism. That's what these midshipmen need, stories of greatness, not grievance." Eleanor nodded politely but remained silent, acutely aware of the Academy's leadership watching this exchange. After the secretary's departure, Eleanor returned to her office, emotionally drained but determined to maintain her professional obligations. She was surprised to find Professor Blackwell waiting for her. "How did it go?" he asked as she closed the door. Eleanor sighed. "About as expected." He seemed pleased with the compliance. Professor Blackwell leaned forward in his chair. "Eleanor, I've been thinking. We need to document this moment, what's happening here and at other institutions across the country. This isn't just about books. It's about who controls the narrative of our national history." "What are you suggesting, Daniel?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," he admitted. "But I know we can't just accept this as the new normal. Too much is at stake." That evening, as Eleanor prepared to leave, she found a small group of faculty members gathered in the library's conference room. Professor Blackwell had apparently been busy. There was Dr. Amara Williams from the English department, Dr. Robert Chan from political science, and Captain Michael Torres, a retired naval officer who now taught leadership ethics. "We hope you don't mind," Professor Blackwell said. "We wanted to discuss some ideas." For the next hour, they talked about the implications of the book removals and potential responses. Captain Torres, with his military background, provided valuable perspective. "There's a line we can't cross as federal employees," he reminded them. "But there are legitimate ways to raise concerns through proper channels." Dr. Williams suggested documenting the educational impact, how courses would be affected by the absence of these resources. Dr. Chen proposed researching the legal precedents regarding academic freedom at military academies. As they talked, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose. These colleagues understood what was at stake, not just books on shelves, but the principles that underpinned educational freedom. The following days brought new challenges. Some midshipmen, hearing about the removals, began requesting the band titles through interlibrary loan, a service Eleanor normally encouraged but now found herself having to restrict. Other students spoke openly in the library about their disappointment, while some expressed support for the administration's actions. One afternoon, Midshipman Trevor Jackson, a third-year student with a reputation for thoughtful analysis, approached Eleanor's desk. "Ms. Reed, I've been trying to find Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give for a paper I'm writing on contemporary social narratives. The catalog shows it should be available, but it's not on the shelf." Eleanor took a deep breath. "I'm sorry, Midshipman Jackson. That title has been removed from circulation following recent directives." Trevor's brow furrowed. "Removed? But it's fiction, a novel that explores complex issues from a teenager's perspective. How is that threatening to our military readiness?" "I understand your frustration," Eleanor said carefully. "If you'd like to discuss alternative sources for your paper, I'd be happy to help." Trevor shook his head. "With respect, ma'am, that's not the point. We're studying to become officers who will lead diverse teams in complex environments. Shouldn't we be exposed to different perspectives, even challenging ones?" Eleanor couldn't disagree, but she was also aware of her professional obligations. "Those are important questions, midshipman. Perhaps ones you might explore in your paper, even without that specific source." Trevor seemed to understand the delicate position she was in. "I'll try, ma'am. Thank you for your honesty." As word spread beyond the academy walls, Eleanor began receiving calls from journalists. She directed all media inquiries to the Academy's Public Affairs Office, as required by protocol. But she saved each voicemail and email, feeling that these too were part of the historical record of this moment. 2 weeks after the removal, Eleanor received a surprising visitor, Admiral Jonathan Harris, a distinguished Academy graduate who now served on the Board of Visitors, an oversight body for the institution. She had met him previously at formal events, but never expected him to seek her out personally. "Ms. Reed," he said after she invited him into her office, "I've been hearing concerns about recent changes to the library's collection." Eleanor maintained her professional demeanor. "Yes, Admiral. We recently removed 381 titles in compliance with directives from the Department of Defense." Admiral Harris nodded thoughtfully. "I saw the list. Some of those books were foundational to my own understanding of naval history and leadership." He paused. "My father couldn't attend the Naval Academy because of his race. When I became the first in my family to graduate from here, I thought it represented progress, that the Navy was committed to learning from history, not erasing it." Eleanor wasn't sure how to respond. Admiral Harris's stature in the naval community was significant. His concerns carried weight. "What's the mood among the midshipmen?" he asked. "Mixed," Eleanor answered honestly. "Some understand it as following orders. Others are questioning what it means for their education." "As they should," the Admiral said. "Naval officers need to follow lawful orders, but they also need critical thinking skills. That includes exposure to difficult ideas, uncomfortable histories, and yes, diverse perspectives." He sighed. "I'll be raising some questions at the next board meeting. Not to cause trouble, but because I believe in this institution and what it stands for." After Admiral Harris left, Eleanor felt both encouraged and concerned. His support meant a great deal, but it also heightened the sense that this situation had broader implications than she had initially realized. The following day, Eleanor found Marcus working on a special project in the archives. Since the removals, he had been meticulously documenting everything, creating backups of the catalog records, noting where gaps now existed in various collections. "What are you working on?" she asked, noticing the intensity of his focus. "I'm creating a comprehensive bibliography of the removed works," he explained, "with annotations about their scholarly significance, awards received, and academic contexts where they've been utilized. Just for the record." Eleanor smiled at his initiative. "That's excellent work, Marcus. Mind if I help?" Together, they worked late into the evening, creating not just a list but a resource that documented the intellectual value of the removed books. Eleanor found it therapeutic in a way, this act of remembering, of refusing to let these works simply disappear without acknowledgement of what they had contributed. The next morning, more than 3 weeks after the initial removals, Eleanor arrived to find an unexpected package on her desk. It contained a letter from Dr. Catherine Martinez, director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom, expressing solidarity with Nimitz Library during this challenging time. "The freedom to read is essential to democracy," the letter stated. While we recognize the unique circumstances of military educational institutions, we also affirm the importance of intellectual freedom as a cornerstone of education at all levels. Included with the letter was a bound report documenting similar incidents across the country, placing the Naval Academy's experience within a broader context. Eleanor found it reassuring to know they weren't alone in navigating these difficult waters. Later that day, Professor Blackwell stopped by with an update from the faculty perspective. Several departments had adjusted their syllabi, finding creative ways to address the absence of key texts. Some professors had incorporated discussions about the removals into their teaching, using it as a case study in leadership ethics and constitutional principles. "It's not ideal," Professor Blackwell admitted, "but educators adapt. That's what we do." "How are the students responding?" Eleanor asked. "They're more engaged than ever," he said with a hint of surprise. This has sparked intense discussions about the role of information in a democracy, about military values versus academic freedom. I've had midshipmen citing Supreme Court cases in class debates. "It's remarkable." Eleanor smiled, finding hope in this unintended consequence. The removal of books had prompted deeper engagement with fundamental questions about knowledge, power, and leadership, essential topics for future naval officers. As April turned to May, campus life continued. Midshipmen prepared for final exams, spring sports teams competed, and the graduating first class prepared for commissioning. On the surface, the academy appeared unchanged, but underneath, conversations continued about what had happened and what it meant. One quiet Saturday, Eleanor was surprised to find Midshipman Sophia Martinez back in the library, this time with 5 other midshipmen representing different class years. "Ms. Reed," Sophia began, "we've been talking about starting a new discussion group. A kind of independent study circle that would meet weekly to discuss important works of literature and history, including some that are no longer in circulation here." Eleanor listened carefully as Sophia explained their plan. They would obtain books through personal purchases or public libraries, meet off campus for discussions, and invite faculty members to occasionally join as advisors. "We're not trying to be rebellious," another midshipman explained. "We just believe that engaging with diverse perspectives will make us better officers." Eleanor considered their proposal thoughtfully. "This sounds like a personal educational initiative that wouldn't fall under library jurisdiction," she said carefully. "As private citizens, midshipmen are certainly entitled to read and discuss whatever books they choose during their liberty time." The students exchanged glances, understanding her tacit approval. "If any of you need research assistance for your personal educational pursuits," Eleanor added, "my door is always open." After they left, Eleanor sat at her desk thinking about these young people, their commitment to learning, their desire to engage with challenging ideas, their creative response to the situation. Despite everything, they gave her hope. The following week brought a new development. The Academy's superintendent had received instructions to submit a report to the Department of Defense detailing the impact of various DEI-related changes, including the library collection modifications. Commander Wallace asked Eleanor to contribute a section about the library. That evening, Eleanor worked late in her office, carefully drafting her portion of the report. She included the factual details: 381 books removed, processes followed, new catalog configurations. But she also included data she had been quietly collecting: the number of course syllabi affected, the academic citations to removed works in midshipman research papers from previous years, the scholarly awards and recognitions of the removed titles. These weren't opinions or protests, just facts that painted a fuller picture of what had been lost. Eleanor knew the superintendent might edit her contribution, but she felt obligated to provide a complete record. As June approached, bringing the end of the academic year, Eleanor received word that Admiral Harris had indeed raised questions at the Board of Visitors meeting. While no immediate changes resulted, he had successfully advocated for a formal review of the educational impact of recent policies, to be conducted during the summer months. For Eleanor, this represented a small victory, not a reversal of the removals, but an acknowledgement that these decisions warranted further examination. It was a reminder that institutions, even hierarchical ones like the Naval Academy, contained internal mechanisms for reflection and adjustment. On the final day of classes, Marcus presented Eleanor with the completed bibliography they had been developing, now a substantial document with over 200 pages of detailed annotations, scholarly contexts, and educational applications for each removed title. "What should we do with this?" he asked. Eleanor considered the question. "For now, we'll add it to our institutional archives, properly catalogued and preserved as part of the Academy's official record. Someday, it may prove valuable for understanding this period." Marcus nodded, satisfied with this approach. Someone in the future might need to know what was here, and why it mattered. As the academic year drew to a close, Eleanor attended the commissioning ceremony for graduating seniors. She watched with pride as Midshipman Sophia Martinez and her classmates took their oaths, preparing to begin careers as naval officers. Despite the challenges of recent months, these young people were moving forward with integrity and purpose. After the ceremony, Sophia sought out Eleanor in the crowd. "I wanted to thank you," she said, "for everything." "I'm not sure what I did," Eleanor replied honestly. Sophia smiled. "You showed us how to respond to difficult situations with professionalism and principle. That's a leadership lesson I won't forget." As summer settled over Annapolis, Eleanor used the quieter months to reflect on her role and responsibilities. She continued to work with Professor Blackwell and other faculty members on documenting the academic impact of the removals, contributing to the review Admiral Harris had initiated. One warm July morning, Eleanor arrived at the library to find an unexpected visitor waiting: Dr. James Wilson, a distinguished historian who had written extensively about the Navy's evolution as an institution. "I'm researching a new book about intellectual freedom in military educational settings," he explained after introducing himself. "Would you be willing to share your experiences here over the past few months?" Eleanor hesitated, mindful of her position as a federal employee with certain constraints. Dr. Wilson seemed to understand her caution. "I'm not looking for criticism or controversy," he clarified. "I'm documenting a significant moment in educational history, how institutions balance competing values and navigate complex challenges. Your professional insights would be valuable." After careful consideration, Eleanor agreed to an interview focused on factual information and professional librarianship practices. She spoke about the processes followed, the steps taken to document changes, and the ongoing efforts to support academic needs within new parameters. Throughout history, Libraries have adapted to shifting political and social landscapes, she told Dr. Wilson. What remains constant is our commitment to preserving knowledge and serving our communities, even when that becomes more challenging. Dr. Wilson nodded thoughtfully. Would you say there's a tension between military discipline and academic inquiry? Not necessarily, Eleanor replied. At their best, both value integrity, evidence-based thinking, and commitment to principles larger than oneself. The challenge comes when we forget that free inquiry and critical thinking strengthen military leadership, not weaken it. As summer turned to fall and a new academic year began, Eleanor noticed subtle changes. The library had received new acquisitions, books about military strategy, technical subjects, and traditional history, filling the physical spaces left by the removals. Life at the academy continued, adapting to new realities as institutions always do. Yet something had changed beneath the surface. Faculty members had found new ways to incorporate diverse perspectives into their teaching. Midshipmen, curious about the books they couldn't access on campus, sought them elsewhere. Discussion groups like the one Sophia had started continued among new groups of students. In October, nearly 6 months after the removals, Eleanor received an unexpected email from Admiral Harris. The review he had initiated was complete, and while it didn't recommend returning the removed books to general circulation, it did propose creating a special research collection accessible to faculty and midshipmen engaged in approved academic projects. It's a compromise, Admiral Harris wrote, acknowledging both the administration's directives and the Academy's educational mission. Not perfect, but a step forward. 2 weeks later, Commander Wallace officially informed Eleanor of the new policy. A designated room in the library's research section would house the previously removed titles, accessible with faculty approval for specific academic purposes. She was tasked with implementing this modified approach. As Eleanor began organizing this new arrangement, she felt cautiously optimistic. The books wouldn't return to general shelves, but they wouldn't remain completely inaccessible either. Knowledge had found a way to persist, even if through a narrower channel. Marcus helped her prepare the new research collection, carefully retrieving the books from storage and creating a specialized catalog system. "It's interesting," he observed as they worked. "These books have become more significant because of what happened to them. Midshipmen who might never have noticed them before are now curious about what they contain." Eleanor nodded, recognizing the irony. Sometimes attempts to limit information end up drawing more attention to it. On the day the special collection opened, Eleanor welcomed Professor Blackwell as the first faculty member to utilize it. He had brought 2 midshipmen researching a project on the evolution of military integration policies. "This is a good compromise," he told Eleanor quietly as the students explored the collection. "Not what we hoped for, but better than what we feared." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "And perhaps there's a lesson here for these midshipmen about institutional change, how it often comes not through dramatic reversals but through persistent, principled advocacy for better approaches." As weeks passed, the special collection became a valuable resource, utilized by faculty and midshipmen engaged in serious academic work. Eleanor maintained meticulous records of its use, documenting the educational purposes it served, evidence that might prove valuable in future discussions about library policies. In December, just before the winter break, Eleanor received a holiday card from Ensign Sofia Martinez, now serving aboard her first ship in the Pacific Fleet. "Our discussion group continues in a new form," Sophia wrote. "Several of us junior officers meet regularly to discuss books that challenge our thinking and broaden our perspectives. My commanding officer has even joined occasionally. We're finding that these conversations make us better officers and leaders. Thank you for planting those seeds." Eleanor smiled as she placed the card on her desk, touched by this continuity across time and distance. The principles of intellectual inquiry that she had sought to uphold were finding new expressions beyond the academy walls, carried forward by young officers shaped by both naval discipline and critical thinking. As winter settled over Annapolis, bringing the year to a close, Eleanor reflected on the journey since those April days when books had been removed from shelves. Much had changed, yet much remained the same. The Academy continued its mission of preparing young people for naval service. The library continued supporting education and research, adapting to new parameters while honoring its fundamental purpose. What had become clearer to Eleanor throughout these months was the resilience of knowledge itself, how it found pathways forward despite obstacles, how it responded to constraints not by disappearing but by finding new channels of expression. She had witnessed this resilience in her colleagues, in midshipmen like Sophia, and in the institutional processes that had eventually created space for compromise. On the final evening before the holiday break, Eleanor walked slowly through the quiet library, her footsteps echoing in the nearly empty building. She paused at the entrance to the special collection room, now properly organized and increasingly utilized. The books inside, works by Maya Angelou, Stacey Abrams, Angie Thomas, Matthew Delmont, and hundreds of others, had traveled an unexpected journey from open shelves to storage and back to this limited but meaningful availability. Their physical presence represented something important about the endurance of ideas and the possibilities for finding better ways forward. As she turned to leave, Eleanor noticed a quote engraved on a plaque near the library entrance, words she had passed countless times but now saw with fresh significance. "A good navy is not a provocation to war. It is the surest guarantee of peace." Theodore Roosevelt. Eleanor reflected on these words, thinking about the complex relationship between military strength and the values being defended. A navy protected more than just physical shores, it also safeguarded principles, including the free exchange of ideas that strengthened democratic societies. Outside, snow had begun to fall softly over the Academy grounds, covering the historic buildings and parade field in a gentle white blanket. Eleanor paused on the library steps, watching midshipmen hurrying across the yard, eager to complete final tasks before departing for the holiday. These young people, she thought, would one day lead not just ships and squadrons but also the nation itself. Their engagement with diverse ideas, whether easily accessible or requiring extra effort to obtain, would shape how they understood the complex world they would navigate as officers. Despite the challenges of recent months, Eleanor felt renewed purpose in her role. The silent shelves had spoken volumes about the importance of knowledge and the enduring quest to preserve it. That quest continued, adapting to new realities while maintaining its essential character, just as the Navy itself had done throughout its long history. With that thought, Eleanor descended the steps and walked into the snowy evening, leaving footprints that would soon be covered by fresh snow but had nonetheless, for a moment, marked her path forward. The spring semester brought new challenges and opportunities. While the special collection was functioning well, Eleanor noticed an unexpected development. Midshipmen were increasingly requesting materials about free speech, academic freedom, and the history of censorship in America. It seemed the experience of book removal had sparked interest in the broader historical context of such actions. In response, Eleanor began curating a new open display titled Information Freedom in Democratic Societies. It featured works that examined the complex relationship between national security, military discipline, and intellectual freedom, all carefully selected to fall within the current guidelines while encouraging thoughtful discussion. One chilly March morning, Eleanor was surprised to receive a call from the superintendent's office requesting her presence at a meeting later that day. Arriving at the appointed time, she found not only the superintendent but also Commander Wallace and two civilian members of the Board of Visitors, including Admiral Harris. "Ms. Reed," the superintendent began after greetings were exchanged, "we've been reviewing the usage statistics for the special collection you've established, as well as the educational outcomes reported by faculty utilizing those materials." Eleanor nodded, waiting for him to continue. "The data suggests these resources are proving valuable for advanced academic work, particularly in history, leadership ethics, and strategic studies courses," he continued. "We're considering an expansion of access parameters." Admiral Harris leaned forward. "What we're proposing, Ms. Reed, is a broadening of eligibility. Currently, access requires faculty sponsorship for specific research projects. We're considering extending access to all upperclassmen with department chair approval, regardless of specific project requirements." Eleanor worked to maintain her professional composure while processing this unexpected development. "That would certainly increase utilization of these valuable resources, Admiral." "There's more," Commander Wallace added. "We're also proposing that faculty be permitted to include selected titles from the special collection on course reading lists, provided they include contextual materials and discussion frameworks that align with the Academy's broader mission." The discussion continued for nearly an hour, covering implementation details, documentation requirements, and assessment metrics. Throughout, Eleanor maintained her professional demeanor while internally celebrating each small step toward greater accessibility. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Harris lingered briefly. "This isn't everything we might hope for," he said quietly, "but it's progress. Sometimes institutional change happens incrementally." Eleanor nodded. "Small steps forward still move us in the right direction, Admiral." The expanded access policies were implemented in April, exactly 1 year after the initial removals. Eleanor worked with her staff to develop new procedures, creating detailed documentation to guide midshipmen and faculty in utilizing these resources. Marcus proved invaluable in this process, developing a digital catalog system that made accessing the special collection more efficient while still maintaining the required oversight. The response exceeded expectations. Within weeks, dozens of midshipmen had applied for access privileges, many sponsored by professors from departments Eleanor hadn't anticipated, including engineering, physics, and computer science. Professor Chen from Political Science explained this broad interest when he visited the library one afternoon. "These students are asking fundamental questions about information control, Eleanor. The engineers are examining it through the lens of technology and data access. The physics students are interested in the historical tensions between classification and scientific progress. It's fascinating to see them applying disciplinary perspectives to this experience. Eleanor found this interdisciplinary engagement deeply encouraging. What had begun as a restriction was evolving into an opportunity for more sophisticated thinking about complex issues, exactly the kind of critical analysis these future officers would need. In May, Eleanor received an invitation that both surprised and intrigued her. The provost had recommended her to serve on a newly formed committee charged with developing guidelines for academic resources across all 5 service academies. The committee would include representatives from the Naval Academy, West Point, the Air Force Academy, the Coast Guard Academy, and the Merchant Marine Academy, along with civilian education experts and Department of Defense representatives. The goal, according to the invitation letter, is to establish consistent approaches that balance legitimate security considerations with the educational needs of future military leaders, ensuring both operational readiness and intellectual development. Eleanor accepted immediately, recognizing this as an opportunity to broaden the impact of what they had learned through their experience at Nimitz Library. The committee's first meeting was scheduled for July in Washington, D.C. Before the academic year ended, Eleanor organized a small reception for the library staff who had navigated this challenging year with professionalism and creativity. As they gathered in the staff lounge, she took a moment to acknowledge their collective efforts. A year ago, we faced a situation none of us had anticipated, she began. We could have simply complied with directives and nothing more. Instead, you all chose to think creatively about how to fulfill both our professional obligations and our commitment to knowledge preservation and accessibility. The special collection, the documentation projects, the new access procedures, all represent your dedication to the core values of librarianship while respecting the unique context of the Naval Academy. Marcus raised his paper cup of punch in a small toast. To finding pathways forward, even when the main road is blocked. The others smiled and raised their cups as well, this simple gesture acknowledging the journey they had shared. As summer arrived, Eleanor prepared for the Service Academy Committee meeting in Washington. She gathered data, compiled case studies of how specific challenges had been addressed, and developed recommendations based on their experiences. She was particularly focused on creating models that would allow for contextual learning around complex or controversial materials, rather than simply removing access. The week before her departure, she received an unexpected visit from Midshipman Trevor Jackson, now entering his senior year and serving as brigade academic officer. "Ms. Reed," he began, "I wanted to update you on something. Remember when I came looking for The Hate You Give last year for my paper?" Eleanor nodded. "Of course. Well, I ended up writing about a different topic entirely, about information access as a leadership issue. That paper has evolved into my honors thesis, which examines how military officers throughout history have balanced operational security with the need for informed decision-making." "That sounds fascinating, Midshipman Jackson." Trevor smiled. "It's been enlightening. I've interviewed retired officers, studied historical case studies, even examined how other countries' military academies approach these questions." He paused. "And I've utilized the special collection extensively. In fact, the experience of observing how our own institution handled this situation has become a central case study." Eleanor felt a profound sense of satisfaction at this unexpected outcome. What had begun as a restriction on this young man's academic inquiry had ultimately sparked a deeper, more sophisticated line of investigation. "Will you be continuing this research after graduation?" she asked. "Actually, yes. I've been selected for the Olmsted Scholar Program. After my initial sea tour, I'll be studying comparative military education systems internationally, with a focus on how different traditions balance discipline with intellectual development." After Trevor left, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the unpredictable ways knowledge and inquiry persisted, finding new channels and expressions when conventional paths were blocked. It reminded her of what naturalists called ecological succession, how disrupted environments eventually give rise to new growth, sometimes even more diverse and resilient than what came before. The July committee meeting in Washington proved both challenging and productive. Representatives from the various service academies brought different perspectives, reflecting their distinct cultures and traditions. West Point's approach emphasized historical continuity, while the Air Force Academy focused on technological innovation. The Coast Guard Academy representative highlighted their humanitarian mission context, while the Merchant Marine Academy discussed the commercial sector interface. Eleanor presented the Naval Academy's experience, including both the challenges faced and the adaptive solutions developed. She was careful to frame everything in terms of educational outcomes and leadership development, keeping the focus on preparing officers for the complex environments they would navigate after graduation. The civilian education experts provided valuable context about academic freedom principles and how they were applied in various settings, including other specialized educational environments like medical schools and law enforcement academies. The Department of Defense representatives emphasized security considerations while acknowledging the need for well-educated, critically thinking officers. After 3 intensive days of discussion, the committee had developed preliminary guidelines that would be refined over the coming months. The framework emphasized tiered access models, contextual learning approaches, and faculty-guided engagement with complex materials, rather than outright removal or unrestricted access. Eleanor returned to Annapolis feeling cautiously optimistic. While systemic change would take time, the conversations had been substantive and focused on educational outcomes rather than political positions. Most encouraging was the discovery that colleagues at other service academies had been working through similar challenges, developing their own innovative approaches. By August, preparations for the new academic year were underway. Eleanor worked with department chairs to implement the expanded access policies for the special collection, developing training sessions for faculty who would be integrating these materials into their courses. Marcus created a comprehensive guide for midshipmen utilizing the collection, emphasizing both the procedural requirements and the scholarly opportunities these materials presented. One afternoon, Eleanor received an unexpected visitor. Dr. James Wilson, the historian who had interviewed her the previous summer, arrived with a freshly published book in hand. "I wanted you to have one of the first copies," he said, presenting it to her. The book was titled Knowledge and Service: Intellectual Freedom in Military Education. Opening it, Eleanor found her interview extensively cited in a chapter examining the Naval Academy's experience. Dr. Wilson had presented a balanced account, documenting both the challenges and the adaptive responses, placing them within the broader historical context of military education in democratic societies. "Your perspective was invaluable," he told her. "You demonstrated how professional ethics can guide responses to difficult situations without resorting to either blind compliance or open resistance." Eleanor felt both vindicated and slightly uncomfortable seeing their experience documented for public consideration. Yet she recognized the importance of this scholarly record, both for historical understanding and for guiding future approaches to similar challenges. As September arrived and midshipmen returned to campus, Eleanor noticed a subtly different atmosphere in the library. The previous year's controversies had settled into something more measured, a kind of thoughtful engagement with the tensions inherent in military academic institutions. New plebes arrived unaware of what had transpired, while upperclassmen carried the institutional memory of changes they had witnessed. Professor Blackwell stopped by during the first week of classes, his bow tie as slightly askew as ever. My military history students have already submitted twice as many special collection access requests as last semester, he reported cheerfully. And 3 seniors have proposed thesis topics examining aspects of diversity in naval history. The restrictions seem to have sparked more interest, not less. Eleanor smiled. Perhaps there's a lesson there about unintended consequences. Indeed, he agreed. Though I wouldn't necessarily recommend book removal as a pedagogical strategy. By October, the special collection was busier than ever. Eleanor had needed to develop a scheduling system to accommodate demand, particularly during peak study hours. Faculty from various departments were utilizing materials for course-related research, often bringing small groups of midshipmen for guided sessions. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor received a surprise email from Ensign Sophia Martinez, now nearly 18 months into her naval career. Attached was a photograph showing Sophia with several fellow junior officers aboard their destroyer, gathered around a small table covered with books for their discussion group. Our CO has become a regular participant, Sophia wrote. She says our discussions about leadership, history, and diverse perspectives are some of the most valuable professional development activities on the ship. I thought you'd like to know that what started at Nimitz Library has spread to the fleet. Books find their way to where they're needed. Eleanor printed the photo and pinned it to her office bulletin board, a reminder of how institutional constraints could be navigated with creativity and commitment to deeper values. November brought the first snowfall of the season, covering the academy grounds in pristine white. Eleanor arrived early one morning to find Commander Wallace waiting outside her office, his expression unreadable. "Good morning, Commander," she said, unlocking her door and inviting him in. "Ms. Reed," he began once they were seated, "I've been informed that our library policies will be discussed at the next Congressional Oversight hearing for service academies." Eleanor felt a flutter of concern. "In what context?" "Both contexts, actually," he replied. "Some committee members have questioned whether our special collection arrangement goes too far in making restricted materials available. Others have suggested it doesn't go far enough in supporting academic freedom." Eleanor nodded slowly, unsurprised that their compromise solution had attracted criticism from multiple perspectives. "The superintendent has asked that you prepare a briefing document explaining our current approach, focusing on how it supports both compliance with executive directives and the Academy's educational mission. He believes your perspective as the implementing officer will be valuable to his testimony." "Of course," Eleanor agreed. "When will the hearing take place?" "Early December. You'll have approximately 2 weeks to prepare the materials." After Commander Wallace left, Eleanor sat quietly at her desk, contemplating this development. What had begun as an internal institutional matter had expanded into national discussions about military education, academic freedom, and the balance between security and knowledge access. Their local adaptive responses were now part of a larger conversation about fundamental values in democratic institutions. Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor worked diligently on the briefing materials, collaborating with Marcus to compile usage statistics, educational outcomes, and assessment data. They documented how the special collection had been utilized across disciplines, the types of academic projects it had supported, and the scholarly significance of the materials it contained. Throughout, Eleanor maintained a focus on educational effectiveness rather than political positions. The completed briefing package presented a balanced picture of an institution navigating complex demands with thoughtfulness and professionalism. Eleanor submitted it to the superintendent's office, unsure how it would be received in the politically charged environment of a congressional hearing. December brought the end of the semester and preparation for winter break. Midshipmen completed final examinations and began departing for holiday leave, their absence leaving the campus unusually quiet. The library operated on reduced hours, giving Eleanor time to catch up on administrative tasks and planning for the spring term. On the final day before the holiday closure, Eleanor received a brief note from the superintendent's office, thanking her for the briefing materials and informing her that the congressional hearing had gone as well as could be expected in the current climate. No specific policy changes were indicated, suggesting their current approach would continue for the foreseeable future. That evening, as darkness fell early and campus lights illuminated the falling snow, Eleanor took a final walk through the nearly empty library. In the main reading room, a single midshipman sat reading near a window, his focus intense despite the approaching holiday. Eleanor recognized him as a plebe who had been a frequent visitor throughout his first semester. "Getting some last-minute reading done before break?" she asked, approaching his table. He looked up, slightly startled. "Yes, ma'am. I'm trying to finish this before I head home tomorrow." Eleanor glanced at the book he was reading, Leadership in Turbulent Times, by Doris Kearns Goodwin, a historical examination of how presidents like Lincoln and Roosevelt navigated national challenges. "What do you think of it so far?" she asked. "It's fascinating," he replied. "Especially seeing how these leaders had to balance competing values and interests during difficult periods. Sometimes there weren't perfect solutions, just better or worse compromises." Eleanor smiled, struck by the young man's insight. "That's an important lesson for any leader to learn." He nodded thoughtfully. "My history professor says understanding these kinds of tensions is especially important for military officers, since we'll often face situations where different values seem to conflict." "Your professor is wise," Eleanor agreed. "Those tensions never fully resolve, but learning to navigate them thoughtfully is part of what makes effective leadership possible." As she continued her walk through the library, Eleanor felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges of the past 18 months had tested her professional principles and personal convictions. There had been no perfect solutions, only thoughtful navigation of competing values, exactly the kind of nuanced decision-making these midshipmen were preparing to exercise throughout their naval careers. Approaching the special collection room, Eleanor paused to observe its quiet presence in the library landscape. What had begun as a response to restriction had evolved into something more nuanced, a testament to how institutions and individuals could adapt to constraints while preserving core commitments. The books within those walls, works by Maya Angelou, Stacey Abrams, Angie Thomas, Matthew Delmont, and hundreds of others, remained available to those seeking deeper understanding of complex human experiences. Their journey from open shelves to restricted storage and back to limited accessibility embodied larger questions about knowledge, power, and institutional values that extended far beyond the academy walls. As Eleanor prepared to leave for the holiday, she thought about the coming year and its unknown challenges. The tensions between security and openness, between tradition and evolution, between authority and inquiry would continue, requiring ongoing navigation rather than permanent resolution. What mattered was maintaining the commitment to both professional obligations and deeper values, finding pathways forward even when the main road seemed blocked. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the historic academy grounds in a fresh blanket of white. Midshipmen hurried across the yard, eager to begin their holiday journeys. These young people, Eleanor reflected, would carry with them not just the knowledge gained from books but the lessons learned from experiencing how institutions responded to challenges, how principles could be maintained even amid constraints, how leadership meant finding balanced paths through competing values. With that thought, Eleanor locked her office door and walked into the winter evening, her footsteps joining countless others in the freshly fallen snow, each marking a temporary path that would soon be covered but had, for a moment, indicated a way forward. Key vocabulary, repeated throughout. Naval Academy, a college that educates and trains officers for the Navy. Midshipman, a student at a Naval Academy training to become an officer. Executive order, a directive issued by the President that has the force of law. Diversity, the inclusion of different types of people in a group or organization. Equity, fairness and justice in how people are treated. Inclusion, the practice of providing equal access to opportunities for all people. Directive, an official instruction or order. Circulation, the lending of library materials to borrowers. Archive, a collection of historical documents or records. Compliance, the act of obeying an order, rule, or request. Academic freedom, the right of teachers and students to express their ideas without censorship. Intellectual freedom, the right of every individual to seek and receive information without restriction. Bibliography, a list of the books referred to in a scholarly work. Censorship, the suppression of speech, public communication, or other information. Collection, the books and other materials in a library. Curriculum, the subjects comprising a course of study. Board of Visitors, an advisory board that oversees an institution. Resilience, the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. Compromise, an agreement reached by each side making concessions. Advocacy, public support for a particular cause or policy. Thank you for joining us on this journey through The Silent Shelves, a Naval Academy story. This tale of resilience, intellectual freedom, and navigating complex principles reminds us how knowledge perseveres even in challenging circumstances. Stories like Eleanor's and the Midshipmen of the Naval Academy teach us not only valuable English vocabulary and expressions, but also profound lessons about leadership, integrity, and the enduring power of ideas. Did this story resonate with you? Perhaps you've experienced situations where you had to balance competing values or navigate institutional constraints while holding true to your principles. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What was your favorite part of the story? Which character did you connect with most? What English words or phrases did you learn today? If you enjoyed this story and want to continue improving your English through engaging narratives and real-world contexts, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with friends who are also on their English learning journey. Don't forget to subscribe to Story-Driven English for more thought-provoking stories, news-based lessons, and vocabulary expansion opportunities. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our new uploads, where we explore the English language through compelling stories from around the world. Join our growing community of English learners who understand that the best way to master a language is through meaningful connection with stories that matter. Until our next story adventure, keep reading, keep listening, and keep growing your English skills one story at a time.